So we're going to start with Ori Brafman, and it's a privilege to have Ori with us. He's got a great career in both entrepreneurship, in the business and government and nonprofit sectors, but he's here especially because his first book, which he co-authored, called The Starfish and the Spider, The Unstoppable Power of Leaderless Organizations, which came out 5 years ago and is now in its 16th printing, and is a little bit of a Bible for people in both the Tea Party and Occupy worlds. So we couldn't think of a better person to open this conference with. Ori.
Thank you so much. And I should say that my comments today are largely developed with my collaboration with Judah Pollock, who I'm working on my next book with. Do you guys know the song from Sesame Street, One Thing is Not Like the Other, right? There's like a spoon and there's like a fork. I'm kind of like the fork in the story. So I'm sitting there a couple of years ago on this Northern California lawn, and there's a DJ playing electronic music. I'm wearing very little, and that very little is pink fur. And I'm having a conversation about vibe, and that's not that weird of a story for me because I live in San Francisco. I went to UC Berkeley. I was a peace and conflict studies major. I'm a vegan. What's interesting about the story is that that same day I go home, I clean up, I put away my fur outfit, and I get on a plane and I go to Virginia. And I have a meeting with this man named Martin Dempsey, who at the time was at the Army. And I knew nothing about the Army at the time. I've been a lifelong civilian, member of UC Berkeley Peace Conflict Studies. And I'm sitting there in this office with him, and this is before he became the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And he asked me about my work around starfish and spider, and specifically the metaphor being that if you take a spider and you cut off the head, it dies. And if you cut off the arm of a starfish, it actually grows the arm right back. Not only that, but in a lot of species, the arm grows an entirely new creature. And the reason for that is because the spider has a tiny little brain, has a tiny little head. And the starfish doesn't. Each one of the arms basically functions independently, and therefore the creature can grow its limbs back. So we're talking about the application of starfish to our fight against various starfish organizations like Al-Qaeda. And he asked me, what do you think we can do to become more adaptable? And I think about it, and at the same moment, I also noticed in front of me there's a box. And I said, what's inside the box, Marty? I didn't know it was calling General. And he opens the box, and inside are baseball card items in there. And instead of pictures of baseball players, they're pictures of soldiers. And he opens the box, and he takes card after card and lays them on the table. And each card represents a soldier who died under his command. And he says, I carry this box wherever I go, and I call the family members, as many times as I can. And I realized that this guy was trying to figure out how can we become adaptable, not just for an intellectual exercise, but in order to protect lives, in order to protect these soldiers' lives. And I look at him, and my mother never taught me manners, and I say, I don't know how to make the Army more adaptable, but neither do you, because you're so far removed from the edge of the network because of the stars on your uniform. And I think about it overnight, and I'm saying, well, you know what, there might be something here. And we come up with this kind of crazy idea, and we say, what if we start small circles here in the Army? And we start circles of 12 to 16 people each, with no agenda, with no end state, without a strategy, with no leadership, just the idea of getting people to talk with one another. We do it out of uniform, in places off base. And all my friends thought I was completely nuts. They're like, don't you know the Army has so many years of history of being top down, and these people will never open up to you, and it's going to get so political. And still, we sit down with these 12 individuals, and we just have conversations. And a lot of these conversations are emotionally based conversations about people sharing stories from their lives. The third day of the circle, one of the guys, he's a soldier, and he's in his early 30s, and he says, you know what, last night was the first night that I slept all night in 3 years. And he shares this story of being in Iraq and how his best friend and him and other soldiers had to clear a room. And his best friend got shot in the head right in front of him. And he had to see that, and not only seeing that, he had to take command of the group that he was with. And that's haunted him. And for some reason, being in a small circle liberated him a little bit. And why did I tell you this story? It's because we can scream ourselves blue and red in the face talking about politics. But the really interesting thing that's going on with Occupy and with Tea Party isn't the what, isn't the ultimate message that they're trying to convey. It's the how. And there's 5 lessons that we can learn from this. The first lesson is that of emergence. Whenever you take people in a circle, whenever you have a non-hierarchical system, you don't know what's going to emerge. Bill W., the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, could never have imagined that he will build an international network. You don't know what's going to emerge from these circles either, whether it's Tea Party or whether it's the Occupy movement. The second element is this idea of asking the right questions. And I would say that when it comes to circles, you have 2 types of people. You have people that are either inside the circle or outside the circle. The people outside the circle are going to be asking very intelligent, the wrong questions. They're going to ask who's in charge. They're going to ask how much money do you have. They're going to ask what's your strategy. They're going to ask what's going to happen next month. Those questions are irrelevant when it comes to our Starfish organization. There are only 2 questions that are relevant. The first and most important question is how much trust do you have with one another? How much emotional bonding is there? The second question is how much do you believe in your cause? And if you believe in your cause and there's trust, then the emergence will take over, and all of a sudden you will have a movement that you couldn't have predicted. The fourth element is we're seeing, especially in Occupy, and I think we're seeing this in Tea Party as well. You have an entire generation that's used to communicating via tweets, having events that are loosely organized, blogging, tweeting. For years and years and years, this generation has been playing around with these technologies. And all of a sudden, we're seeing a generation operationalizing its play. You look at the General Assembly, for example. And the way that people communicate with the human microphone, you have to communicate in tweet-sized messages. This is a different way of organizing. The fifth thing to consider, I think, is the most important. Anybody who's going to guess what's going to happen next in Tea Party or what's going to happen next in Occupy, I inherently distrust because they don't get the idea of emergence. This is going to be a platform for activism moving forward. And I want to tell you the very quick story of this woman named Elizabeth Cady Stanton who goes to Britain. And she goes to an anti-slavery conference. And at this anti-slavery conference, she comes up with the idea that women need to have the right to vote in America. She comes back to America and found the women's suffrage movement. Could anyone have predicted that a little meeting in London would have started the women's suffrage movement? No. And that's what we need to focus on. Isn't necessarily what's going to happen tomorrow, but what more activism is this going to lead to tomorrow? And finally, again, it's the idea not of what these people are fighting for. We might have very different visions of how America should be, but what's important is how are we going to fight for it? And that is going to be based on the small circles of trust. I think that asking what's next, while a very interesting question, doesn't give us patience, doesn't acknowledge the fact that there is emergence. I'm working with the Army. It's a top-down organization. And if the Army wanted to today, it can take off with this entire room and can dispose of us. There's no question that top-down organizations have power. But take a couple of considerations. For the last 10 years, the Army has fought a distributed, decentralized organization. And how much real progress have they made? This is the second year in a row that more soldiers have killed themselves to suicide. More soldiers have committed suicide than died in combat. And I want to offer you a story. For a second, don't close your eyes, but think of the 3 people who are closest to you. Just think about them for a second. And think about what emotions come up. Maybe it's your mother, a lover, a brother, a friend. I want to tell you about this guy named George who mentored another kid in West Point. He was an older soldier. He mentored a younger kid. The kid ended up marrying George's daughter, goes to Afghanistan. And his second month there, he walks in a landmine and instantly loses both of his legs. And George is devastated, and his daughter doesn't know what she's going to do with her life. And the people that he turns to are the people that he sat with in a circle. It's not his family, it's not the people he served with. It's this connection. And I think that unless we really acknowledge the power of connection, yes, we all want power, we all want sex, money, and a bunch of things, but one thing I can guarantee you is all of us in this room want connection. And what emerges from connection can't be predicted. It can't be put into a chart. Really, it's one of these things of true emergence. The question I have for you guys is, think about it seriously. How many circles do you belong to? How many circles? And it's nice to say, oh, other people should do that. And circles are messy, and they bring out weird people, and they talk about process, and you want to be done with it. But the bottom line for me is to trust in the process. Because that same process, that very simple, I don't know if it's 17th century or if it's 1st century, has changed the world time and again. Alcoholics Anonymous, the women's suffrage movement, the anti-slavery movement. And I hate to use this as a positive example. The reason we're here in this room is because a network of terrorists did something horrible in New York, and they used the exact same process. The process works. It's messy, but we have to trust it.